Surprise! Mom's coming along too! With those words, my husband's excited voice echoed through the entryway. Behind the cheerful husband and mother-in-law, I stood, unable to hide my shock. And for good reason. After all, the trip my husband mentioned his mother was joining us on was our honeymoon. As I stood confused, unable to comprehend what my husband was saying, he pursed his lips and frowned. What's the matter? Aren't you happy? Happy? That was the last thing I could be. He must have known that. After all, I had repeatedly expressed how terrible my relationship with my mother-in-law was. She seems unable to forgive me for stealing her precious son. Whenever she sees me, she piles on the sarcasm as much as she possibly can. The tricky part is, she never shows this side of herself in front of my husband. She plays the part of the good mother-in-law perfectly. Because of this, no matter how much I confided in my husband about being mistreated, he barely believed me. However, he should have been well aware of my discomfort around her. Yet he planned something like this. What was he thinking? Hold on, it's today? There's no way we can get a flight or hotel now. Of course, I hadn't booked anything for his mother. Trying to tag along without reservations during the peak travel season is unimaginable. As I explained this, my husband snorted as if it were obvious. Well, give me all your tickets then. I'll go with Mom. He reached out as if it were the most natural thing in the world, leaving me speechless. Really, what is he thinking? This isn't just any trip, it's our honeymoon. What kind of husband would go on his honeymoon with his mother? No, even a regular trip with this mother-in-law would be dreadful. As my mouth fell open in shock, my mother-in-law had a triumphant look on her face. It must be a proud moment for her, her son choosing her over his wife. Come on, hurry up. I paid for it, so it shouldn't matter, right? Thinking that because he paid for the trip, he could do whatever he wanted, this man. As I thought about it, something occurred to me. By the way, about the cost of this trip. My name is Kelly. I'm 28 years old and work for the company my father manages. Despite the initial criticism of my being a nepotism hire, I've worked diligently and started to earn some recognition. However, being the boss's daughter, I still occasionally hear hurtful comments behind my back. My husband, Tom, has been my support through all of this. He's the same age as me and was assigned to the same team, making it easy for us to start dating. He handled his work efficiently and contributed significantly to our performance, which pleased my father immensely. When we announced our engagement, my father was all for it. So you're Tom. I've heard a lot about you. Yes, I'll make your daughter happy. I remember how bright those exchanges between my father and Tom seemed at the time. At that point, my father was considering handing over the company to someone else. And there was even talk of Tom taking over. Being able to entrust the business to a capable son-in-law probably wasn't an unpleasant thought for my father. Since I was never one to be at the forefront, having a capable son-in-law to take over the company was the best possible outcome. That's probably what he was thinking. Although my father never directly discussed these matters with me or Tom, he often spoke about the mindset needed for managing during our meals together, so it seemed likely that it would happen eventually. Tom's father had passed away, and his mother lived alone in their family home. Tom always took great care of his mother, even rushing to her side during our dates if she needed help. He was raised by her alone, and he wanted to repay that debt, apologizing as I smiled and sent him off. How wonderful it was to be involved with someone who cherished his mother so much. But after we got married and started living together, I began to notice things. I'm just gonna pop over to Mom's place. This phrase had become almost like a mantra for him. And he went to see her almost every week. Is your mother feeling ill? When I asked out of concern, it seemed that was not the case. Kelly, don't worry about it. Everyone needs some time to themselves, right? At first, he would say this while stroking my head, but even that had stopped recently. One Saturday morning, as he was cheerfully preparing to leave, I asked him, "Hey, are you going over to your mom's place again today?" Until then, my husband, who had been in a good mood, abruptly stopped what he was doing and let out a heavy sigh. "Hey, what's up with that tone?" Startled by his words, I shrank back. Damn, I had spoken more harshly than I intended, but it was too late. He turned around and glared at me sharply. "It can't be helped. My mom is alone at home. I'm just checking in on her because you said you didn't like it, okay?" I flinched at his response. Yes, I've always been uncomfortable around my mother-in-law. It wasn't always like this, of course. The mother of the man I love. I wanted to cherish her just as much as my husband does. That was what I thought initially. But it's not guaranteed that the feeling will be reciprocated. My mother-in-law seemed to think of me as a cat thief who had stolen her son. Ever since we met, she had been making snide remarks when my husband wasn't around. It happened the first time I went to greet her. As soon as my husband left the table to use the restroom, and the sound of his footsteps faded, her demeanor changed completely. She looked me up and down as if appraising me. "I don't care if you're the boss's daughter or whatever, you're nothing special." Before I could recover from the shock, she continued with heavy sarcasm. "To think you'd show your face after stealing Tom from me. I don't acknowledge you at all. Don't get it twisted." She sneered at me, taking me aback, and slurped her coffee. Naturally, she hadn't served any coffee in front of me. "Hey! Don't talk to me. It's creepy. Why did I have to face such hostility from someone I had just met?" Even though I tried hard to speak up, she dismissed me immediately. As I stood bewildered, feeling utterly isolated, the sound of my husband returning from the restroom reached my ears. And just like that, as if nothing had happened, my mother-in-law suddenly smiled warmly again and offered me coffee as if she had just remembered. "Oh, I'm sorry. Here I am not even offering you coffee." With a light laugh, my husband, who had just returned, forced a wry smile. "What's going on, Mom? You haven't served the coffee yet?" "She's a lovely girl, Tom. I just forgot to offer the coffee." Saying that, she smiled kindly, appearing to be a good-natured person. I'd be happy if Kelly would feel comfortable talking to me without any reservations. I felt a chill down my spine. Ever since then, my mother-in-law has continued to make cutting remarks whenever my husband is not around. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My husband must be unaware of the malice she shows only to me. Despite my attempts to talk to him about it, he always insisted, "My mom would never say that. If you hate it so much, you don't have to see her." My words never seemed to convince him, and he looked disappointed. At first, I pleaded earnestly. But no matter what I said, my husband always sided with his mother, so I gave up trying to clear up the misunderstanding. And I decided to take my husband's words at face value. I didn't have to see her. I avoid visiting my in-laws unless absolutely necessary. From his perspective, I probably just seem to dislike his important mother. "Then, make sure to lock up." Saying this, he headed to his mother's place without looking back at me again. Wait, I reached out, but grabbed only air. My husband's back blurred through my tears. On days we argue about his mother, he doesn't come home. It felt like a harsh reminder that his mother is more important to him than his wife. If it weren't for the issues with his mother, Tom would be a good husband. He notices when I'm struggling at work and supports me quickly, and even though he often works late, he helps with the housework. Maybe it's better this way since he said I don't have to see her, I muttered to myself while looking at a travel brochure. I shook my head, trying to focus on the plans in front of me. I had been looking forward to this honeymoon. For this honeymoon, at least, I won't have to think about my mother-in-law. At least my husband won't be called away to rush to her. Joining a team for a major project has increased my husband's overtime. As we consider his suggestions, I wonder where we should go. Perhaps we should indulge ourselves? As I flip through the pages, the temptation arises, but I quickly reconsider. Since I've left all the planning to you, at least let me pay for it from my account. Despite my insistence on sharing the costs of our honeymoon, he laughed it off without listening. If it's just him paying, spending too much isn't good. Moreover, I don't want to give my mother-in-law ammunition to mock me for being loose with money just because I'm the boss's daughter. With that thought, I can't help but smile wryly. I was trying to focus, but I find myself thinking about my mother-in-law again. Oh, stop it. Deciding to change the mood, I set aside the brochure and start preparing dinner as my husband will be home soon. Then comes the morning of our honeymoon. Amid my frantic preparations, the doorbell rings. Yes? I was at the door and, without checking the intercom, opened it only to be surprised. What? There she stood, in flashy clothes with a huge suitcase. Hearing my voice, my husband peeked out. You're early, Mom. He cheerfully greeted her. The mother-in-law, ignoring me, left me bewildered as I looked back and forth between them. Early? What do you mean? Despite the fact that we were supposed to be going on our honeymoon, what was with her massive luggage? Was she planning to stay at our place while we were gone? As I stood confused, my husband, with a smile resembling his mother's, announced. Surprise! Mom's coming with us. What? Shocked by my husband's solo applause. A foolish sound escaped me. What on earth are you talking about? Like I said, Mom's coming on our honeymoon. Unable to hide my confusion, my husband pursed his lips and said, then joyfully put his arm around his mother's shoulder. If we're going on a trip, it's better with Mom. Watching her sunbeam, my mother-in-law turned a smug face towards me. No, wait a minute. I try to calm my confused mind and ask carefully. It's our honeymoon, right? Aren't honeymoons supposed to be just for the couple? I mean, if you really wanted to invite an important family member, shouldn't you have discussed it first? Am I wrong? I'm not wrong, right? Yet why do they look puzzled by my words? It's like we're not speaking the same language, and I can't believe what my husband is saying. Furthermore, my mother-in-law, seemingly pleased by my distress, even starts humming. Why do we have to argue on what should be a joyful honeymoon day? And a surprise? What do you mean by springing this on the day of the trip? What's the big deal? I paid for it, so it's fine. My husband snaps, noticing my stunned expression. No, it's not fine. Was his insistence on paying not to ease my burden, but to make sure I couldn't object to bringing his mother? Wait, you can't just spring this on me, it's obviously impossible. I say, sighing in frustration. Both my husband and mother-in-law start to look visibly upset. What do you mean, impossible? Oh, Kelly just doesn't want to travel with me. My mother-in-law complains as if she's the victim, my husband acting childishly, mirroring her tone. My headache intensifies. It's not about wanting or not wanting. Tom, did you even book the flight and hotel for your mom? He looks baffled. Huh? We can book that now. That's impossible. Do you know how far in advance I had to make reservations? I raise my voice, incredulous at their lack of planning. Could they really have thought it would all just work out on the day? Though I had resolved not to splurge, the hotel I booked was quite nice. Especially now during a peak travel period. There's no way there are vacancies on flights or at the hotel now. I argue, and my husband nonchalantly holds out his hand. Then give me all your tickets. What? I ask, utterly bewildered. Just give me your tickets if there aren't any for Mom. I paid for the trip, so I'm ordering you. As my triumphant mother-in-law's face comes into view, everything before me goes dark. What? What does this mean? What am I being told? Since Mom went through all the trouble to prepare, I'll go on the trip just with her. We can go on a different trip together later, Kelly, okay? My husband's rationale, prioritizing his mother as naturally as breathing, leaves me unable to keep up. Or does he think everything will just smooth over if he goes on the trip without me? I've said it time and again, but this is supposed to be our honeymoon. A trip meant for just my husband and me. And now, out of nowhere, his mother shows up expecting to go with us, thinking it's some kind of surprise. Mom went through all the trouble to prepare? I couldn't care less. If anyone should be making concessions, it should be her going home. Yet here I am, being told by my husband to just give up. I'm utterly dumbfounded. I was going to keep quiet, I say, holding my throbbing head and letting out a heavy sigh. But the trip is actually being paid for by my father. You haven't paid a dime, so you have no right to demand my ticket. When I tell him this, it's now my husband's turn to look bewildered. That makes sense. He thought he had paid, which is why he felt so entitled. Why would your father do that? As he starts to sweat, I give him a cold look. He gave us the honeymoon funds to save for our future. And he even told me to keep quiet about it, considering your pride. Why didn't you tell me? My husband yells, his face turning red with the shock. The mother-in-law, who had been smug up until now, probably didn't expect that my father was the one paying. She starts to fidget nervously. Watching my husband's tantrum, I feel my emotions cooling rapidly. All the tolerance for my mother-in-law's snide remarks and my husband's mother-first attitude just drains away. If you two are going, then you'll need to reimburse my father, and I'll cancel the reservations. Go on your trip with your own money. As I shake off my husband and mother-in-law's frantic attempts to stop me, I grab my packed bags and leave the house. This is no joke. There's no way I'm letting my father's money be used for such a selfish mother and son duo. Thanks to them dumping everything on me because they were busy, all the reservations for the flight and hotel were in my name, so I started canceling them as I get into the taxi I had called. Instead of heading to the planned airport, I give the driver my parents' address, and the taxi starts moving, albeit with a hint of confusion. When a daughter supposed to be on her honeymoon returns home with heavy luggage, my father is shocked beyond belief. But when he hears the whole story, he becomes furious. What the hell is that? Are they kidding? The constant calls from my husband only fuel my father's anger further. And of course, my own. After telling my father everything, my resolve solidifies. Dad, I think I want to divorce. I state clearly, and my father calms his anger and quietly supports me. Without saying whether it's good or bad, he just gently rubs my back, his hand warm. I'm sorry, Dad. As tears spill over, I see my father's other hand clenched tightly. The next day, my husband comes to my parents' house to apologize. My father stops me as I try to send him away at the gate. If you're going to divorce, you need to talk it out. I want to hear his side of the story directly. Let him in. Though I had intended to involve a lawyer, I let him in because my father insisted. As my husband realizes my father is at the door, he quickly apologized. Seeing my husband act meekly just because he's in front of my father irritates me. As he continues to act overly apologetic, my father signals me to lead them to the sitting room. I am terribly sorry for causing such a disturbance. Before he can even finish greeting, my husband starts begging. It seems like he talks to my father like that when he's dealing with him in a businesslike manner. Accustomed to it from work, his perfectly executed apology is almost sickening. What are you apologizing for, exactly? My father sighs, not knowing how many times he has done so already. I felt the same way. My husband said he was sorry for causing a disturbance. He wasn't apologizing for what he did to me. That's just insulting. In a rush to say something, my husband started to speak, but I cut him off and handed him a piece of paper. Here's the divorce papers. I've already completed mine. I said this deliberately politely, and his face turned pale as if he hadn't expected the divorce papers to come out at all. Wait, Kelly, divorce, what are you talking about? It seemed like the first time he actually looked at me since he came into the house. To him, I'm always second best. It doesn't bother you, right? You have your mother after all. If that's his intention, I might as well speak to him as I would a business associate. I have no intention of repairing our relationship. I must make my feelings clear through my actions. What are you talking about? Why bring up my mother now? She was looking forward to that trip too. We can go with Kelly anytime, right? I was appalled. He didn't understand at all why I was angry and left. Anytime, what are you talking about? It was supposed to be our honeymoon. I trembled with rage, trying to suppress it with my right hand. My clenched lips hurt. What kind of husband tries to go on a honeymoon he planned with his wife, with his mother instead? Speaking out loud made it all the more pathetic. But my husband continued as if to rub salt in the wound. But I was initially trying to take her with us. It was Kelly who said there were no flights available or that the hotels were booked. Think about it. It's impossible to get anything on the day you tell me. Unbelievable. He was serious. Amidst my confusion and anger, he was genuinely shouting that it was my fault. And you're telling my mother to go back? She was looking forward to it so much. He spat it out with such ferocity it seemed he might physically grab me. My father quietly intervened. Enough. Stop it. Until now, my father had been listening silently and shook his head in dismay. Tom, I am disappointed in you. No way. Suddenly calmer, my husband straightened up at those words. My father just looked at him with a sad expression. Why did you prioritize your mother over Kelly in that situation? Well, pressed by my father, my husband started to sweat. He could argue back at me, but not at my father. A honeymoon is meant to be for the couple. You could have traveled with your mother any other time, right? Was your promise to cherish my daughter a lie? It wasn't a lie. I just wanted to value my mother too. My father glared at him for the first time. So you don't mind hurting Kelly? My husband fell silent. I'm sorry. He apologized with a trembling voice. But his clenched hands betrayed his humiliation. He was apologizing because he had to, not because he felt it was necessary. He probably didn't think there was anything wrong with what happened. He was apologizing because he was in trouble with my father, the CEO, nothing more. Tom, you are competent at your job. At my father's words, my husband relaxed, thinking he was forgiven, but then realized he was mistaken. But a gaze colder than a midwinter lake pierced through him. But no matter how capable you are at work, I can't trust someone who doesn't value family. My father then handed him a pen, and my husband started to shake. Wait, please! Anything but divorce! I'll change! My husband wouldn't take the pen, so my father forced it into his hand. You should be apologizing to someone else, not me. Now my husband turned to me, begging. Kelly, say something, please! I'm begging you, not a divorce! He came to my feet as if fleeing from my father, looking up at me while clinging to my legs. From now on, I'll prioritize you. I couldn't even cry anymore. Disdain for me was apparent in every word he said. Please! If you divorce me, I won't be able to pay off the debt. Seeing that neither my father nor I were nodding, he shouted as if it slipped out. Debt? What is that? As I looked down at his disheveled head, I repeated the new word I just heard. And my husband jumped away from my feet in shock. He seemed to have blurted it out without thinking. Well, that... As my father and I silently demanded he tell everything, my husband finally resigned himself to explain. Well, actually... The truth hesitantly revealed by my husband was enough to make both my father and me hold our heads. It turns out, my husband and mother-in-law believed without a doubt that the CEO of the company would fall into their laps, and they had been splurging without regard for money. The reason he went back to his mother's house every week was apparently because they were spending money together. There's even less reason to keep the marriage now. My father, utterly contemptuous and speechless, watches as my husband finally shows a genuine act of contrition. Please wait. If you divorce me, I won't know what to do tomorrow. His repeated apologizing was almost comical, like a toy I'd seen somewhere. That's none of our concern. I send a dry look his way and just wait for him to sign the divorce papers. There's nothing more to talk about, so my father and I quietly sip our coffee. Of course, none for my husband. Though the divorce papers were somewhat coerced, the divorce went through without a hitch. The lawyer my father hired was incredibly capable, and apparently, negotiations went smoothly, partly because I had kept a detailed diary. We even claimed alimony that included the cancelled honeymoon costs, and there was an attempt through lawyers to reduce it. My father told me he had rejected it before I could even respond, and I couldn't help but laugh. As for my ex-husband, he quit his job hurriedly as the divorce became known at the company, making things awkward for him. Leaving on his own meant little severance pay, and with just a small amount of savings left, he struggled to pay the alimony and his debts, forcing him into a much more modest life, I heard from the lawyer. And as for the former mother-in-law, she's bedridden and scraping by with part-time jobs, so desperate that she's been asking old colleagues for money. While it's unclear how true this all is, it now makes for a funny story at gatherings. As for me, I am likely to take over as the next CEO of the company after my father, who has decided to retire, and the other employees have pushed me to step up. Despite my reluctance to be in the forefront, persuaded by my father's rare show of vulnerability, he didn't want to leave the company to someone unreliable. I accepted the responsibility. Though I was initially hesitant, it turns out I may have inherited some business acumen from my father. With his support as chairman, our company's performance has continued to improve. Thanks to gaining more confidence in myself, I've started to receive more invitations to parties where business people gather. I'm not thinking about a new romance just yet, but maybe it's time to take the next step.